Hello. Welcome to the David Watson podcast. Welcome back. It's funny, I'm feeling amused because in this episode, I speak to Linda Stewart Henley. It was a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed it. But the reason I'm amused is freaking heck, we had some technical difficulties trying to get the Zoom to log in. And then halfway through the conversation, my side Zoom crashed, just switched itself off. I don't know how these things work. But I would just like to shout out and say a massive, big thank you to Linda for the patience, the perseverance, keeping a good humour about it. And we talked about her upcoming book, a third book called Kate's War. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I certainly love talking to Linda, and I hope you like listening. Hello, welcome to the David Watson podcast. I'm very grateful that you actually managed to get through, as we've had a few technical difficulties. Neither of us are qualified to fix them, so we've done all right so far.
Well, as a friend of mine says, computers are great except when they're not.
I know, and I tell you, I always feel like I'm pointless at this moment because I don't know how to help people, and it's me setting up the meetings and everything. So if it doesn't go perfect from the off, and they're like, "Oh, what do we do?" I'm like, "Do you know what? This is a cop out, but I have no
Right.
idea." But we're here now, and we're all good, and we're here to talk about your new book, but it's your third book, isn't it?
Yes, my third book, Kate's War.
Kate's War. Before we get into Kate's War, could you just tell people where you're from and how did you get where you are today?
Okay. May I ask this first? Are you broadcasting to England or to America or both?
What the podcast itself? Well, I'm in England. I'm literally about a 30-minute walk from Stonehenge, and near Salisbury, and obviously the town itself is Amesbury, and the podcast itself gets put on YouTube, Rumble. Then I use a platform called Podbean, which puts it on other platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Google Cast, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and about 20 other platforms, some of which aren't accessible to England, so I've never even heard them. I think it even goes on Audible, you know?
Yeah, I just ask because in my book is set in England, and
Yes.
if English people are listening, they would the town would make more sense to them. So,
Yeah.
otherwise Americans don't know where Carshalton is. They
No,
don't,
no,
you know.
of course. We're going to
No.
get into that because you are, in fact, English.
Yes, that's right. And so the story is set in Carshalton, in Surrey, which is about 9 miles uh, to the south of the center of the city of London.
Yeah,
So that's where the setting is. Is that what you asked me? I'm sorry, I got
that's okay.
confused.
No, that's no.
Yeah.
That's, it's yeah, it's literally because it's an integral part of the book, isn't it? Because although I'm talking to you, you're in Washington State. Is that correct?
Yes, I live in Washington State. Yes.
But you're originally
But
from.
I was born in England, and I grew up in England and I was there until I was 16, and then my family moved to America. Actually, the family moved back to England, but I stayed on. But
Okay.
I still have connections there.
Yeah,
Yes.
of course. And yeah, because yeah, you were born in Liverpool, weren't you? And then moved to Surrey.
Yes.
And
Yes.
obviously, for those that don't know, Surrey was an integral part of the Second World War for the UK, for England, Kent and Surrey.
Yes.
Um,
Yes,
uh,
it would have been. Yeah, because it was near to London, and everyone expected that the bombing would happen there, and maybe even the invasion would happen there. Germany would invade England, and my book is about the second set in the Second World War. It's not about the Second World War. It's set in the Second World War, and it's set in the year before the Blitz. It's the year that war is declared in September 3rd, 1939, and then the Blitz didn't start until a full year later in September 1940. So Kate's War is set in that in that period during that first year when everyone's expecting bombing and possibly an invasion, but actually nothing happens in the country.
Yeah, because I mean, that was a difficult time in the country because there was a period where we'd declared war, but nothing happened. And I think there was something like 6 months in between the war being declared and actual action being taken while we kind of galvanized the troops and organized everybody. And so, yeah, it must, I can't imagine what it was like to be there. And you, I guess, were fortunate in a way that you learnt some of this from your father.
Yes, that's what inspired the book. But I didn't know about the event that inspired the book until after he died. He left a memoir of sorts, not published, but I read it after he died, and I was absolutely astonished to find out what he had done in the war. I'm not going to talk about it because it'll spoil the ending of the book.
That's okay.
But I used that. That was the part. That's what I wrote the book to get to the ending because that was the part that my father wrote about. So, and the ending's pretty shocking, actually. So, and then in answer to your earlier statement, yes, it would have been terrible that year, living that year, waiting for the Germans, waiting for the bombs. I wasn't there. I was born after the war. But where I set the story is where I grew up. And I know that it hadn't changed much from the time of the war until the setting that I had, until I lived there. So I understood the environment and the way people lived really well. And that helped me, even though, of course, I had to make up the story
Yeah.
and make up the lives of people that were living there.
So how did you make up the story?
Well, of course, I read a lot of books. I had to learn about the war. I didn't know a lot. I knew some, but I read history books, and I also read several novels that were set in that time by English writers so that I could get the atmosphere right and the authentic British experience because I've become Americanized and I forgot a lot.
When you say you became Americanized, what did you realize you'd forgotten?
Well, okay. When I submitted the book to my publisher to see if they would publish it, you just submit 50 pages or something and they can judge by that. Their comment was, it didn't sound English. It sounded American, and we need it to be British. And so I said, that's no problem. I'll just have my brother Brit proof it for me. So he did. He took the manuscript and he went through and changed all the expressions that I had that were wrong and helped me make it sound more authentic.
I don't know why I find that very funny, but I also I do understand the importance of it. But I'm not sure is that an insult or a compliment? Because on one
I'm
hand,
sorry.
it's is that an insult or a compliment? Because on one hand, it shows how
Oh,
well you've settled into America, but on the other hand, somebody's also saying, "You don't sound British."
I'm a sort of a blend. But the things that I remember so much living in England, like drinking tea, you mentioned tea. My mother drank tea all day long. And as soon
Tea.
as she finished a pot, yeah, you have some, she'd put the kettle on again. She actually burned kettles out because she didn't
Mm,
remember to catch them in time. So she was always burning out kettles. I actually put that in the book because that's authentic,
it is. It is.
right?
It's a funny thing. We are a lot of the stereotypes about tea drinking and kettles are extremely relevant today and still true. We do have a strange obsession with tea.
Yes. Well, more so than in England, in America. I mean, in England, tea has to be just done a certain way. The pot has to be warm. The tea has to be hot. You has to be hot enough so that when you put milk in, it's still hot. Things
Yeah.
like that. In America, they just dunk a tea bag in a cup. It's no good.
Also, as well, and I've seen this on things like Instagram and TikTok. They don't have kettles, and they just put tea bag in a cup and put it in the microwave. And
Right.
and
Yeah.
they're like, what's the problem? And as an Englishman, I can't
Yeah.
explain. Well, actually, I'm the worst type because I'm half Irish as well. I'm half Irish, half English. So there's two parts of me that's just horrified. It's just like if I have to explain why you can't put it in the microwave, frankly we can't be friends. It's just how simple it is.
So even though it's a stereotype about the tea, there's some
It's so
definitely truth
true.
to it.
It's so true. It is, and and we're not ashamed of it either. We're proud of it. So, because and that's actually it's an integral and important part of writing, isn't it? Especially when, although you're writing from memory and it's a fictional account, but is it fictional of what could be argued like artistic license of events that probably would have happened?
All right. Well, I'm all the family, all the characters in the family. The story is about a family, an ordinary family, and how they adjusted to the onset of war. And of course, it's Kate's story, so it's mostly her, but she has a father and a mother and a brother, and they're all definite characters in the book. So I made those up and had them and showed their struggles as they dealt with the war, the problems of the war, evacuation, rationing, preparation, war shelters, air raid shelters, all that sort of thing. So I made those things up. And of course, with historical fiction, you have to stay within the guidelines of what's historically accurate as well. So even though the book is not about the war, there are milestones
Yeah.
and things that happened during that year, and I just mention them. Often it was things like the family sitting around the wireless listening to the news because that's what people did. So I didn't make up some of of course, the important characters. I have some quotes from Churchill, for example, because he was important at the time, and I had quite a bit about Vera Lynn, who was a singer that
Yeah.
people but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
Absolutely.
Americans don't know. Very
Is it
famous.
we'll meet again? I don't know where. I don't know when.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And it's interesting. I decided I wanted to use some of the lyrics for that song, and the other one that was popular was "There Will Always Be in England."
Yes.
That
Yeah.
was very patriotic, and I wanted to use just one line of those songs in because I thought it would sound right in the book. But I had to get permission from the
Okay.
people that owned the copyright just to use those two lines. It took me 6 months to find out
No
who
way.
held the copyright. Yeah. And so I got it. And then I had to put the permission at the back. Or permission was given because they could sue me.
I did not know that. I didn't know you would have to. I mean, I could imagine that if you used the entire lyric to the song, but not just for like a reference to the line. That
Yeah, no, well, there are some reasons. Sometimes you wouldn't have to do that. If the
mm,
song is in the public domain, for example, you don't have to.
yeah,
But this song was too new and it wasn't in the public domain, so I had to go through that. And I could have just not done it, not used the line, but I wanted to.
yeah.
So anyway,
Well, that's the funny thing
yeah.
about writing, isn't it? Is you get when you're writing, you get this funny something. It has to be just as it is, the way you saw it in your head, or the way it came to you. And when somebody says, "Oh, you can do it like that way, this way," you're like, "But that's not how it come to me. It has to be this way."
Yeah. Yeah, I could have dropped it. I could have just not used the lines. I could have just because you can use the title. But I did, like you said, I wanted to have it the way I wanted to have it.
Because that's I don't know. I mean, I've just been quite clumsy in trying to articulate it. But I think it's for people, any aspiring writers or people who are writing. It I wonder if it's something we could just go over because seeking 6 months of permission for something that you could easily bypass misses the point of writing something important. It's because it can make you obsessive.
Yes, well, I think that's what it takes, frankly, to
Yeah,
finish a book. You have to be pretty obsessed, very persistent, it can drive you kind of crazy and neurotic as well. Not everyone probably, but me.
Hmm.
It drove me pretty neurotic.
But it is. It's. I remember reading about a writer. I think he wrote in the 70s. A guy called Richard Bach, I think his name was. He wrote books such as uh, A Bridge Across Forever and Illusions of a Young Messiah. And somebody asked him about writing and his writing style, and he said, "No, actually, I don't like writing." Um, he said, "But something builds up inside me, and I have to get it out before I go crazy."
Well, this book is my third, and it was the one I would have liked to have written earlier, but I didn't think I had the writing skills to do it because it had to do with my father and a true incident and more of me with the war, and my family were in the book, really, even though I don't say that. So I really wanted to write it and waited until I felt I had the skills to do so, and I hope it's successful. I don't know yet. It's not even published yet. Will be published in April.
Yeah,
But I did feel very strongly that I wanted to honor my father and people that actually sacrificed in the war, and people that had to put their lives aside for the entire duration, really, of the war. And now people are doing that again,
yeah,
in Ukraine. And it's horrible to have another war, two other wars really going on. And it made me more appreciative of what I was doing once I realized that there are actually still wars going on like this.
yeah. It's very strange when we already know the outcomes of wars because we had World War I and World War II, and yet there just seems to be this human persistence of, do you know what? We'll just do it again.
We haven't learned. We just
No,
haven't learned.
it's I don't I often struggle to comprehend what do you need to happen for people to just say, okay, we can't do it this way anymore. Do you know what I mean?
Well, my book is not political, actually.
Mm.
I'm not trying to make
So
a
we'll
big
steer
statement
very
in any
clear of that
way.
because we're having a nice cup of tea and we don't
Yeah,
need to ruin it.
yeah, it's just I was really just trying to write a good story.
Yeah,
And, it happened to be set in the war, but it's really about Kate's war, her struggles within herself. And she's 20 years old. She's trying to start her life, and the war gets in the way. So she does the best she can, and she has to change her goals, which is what people had to do, in a war. They always do, I think.
do you know that's a fascinating concept. I've never thought about that because you're going to wake up one day, kind of like you say, at 20. So you're going to go from sort of 16 to 20. That I'm trying to think. Sorry, if I could just have a second, because I'm trying to think, what would that be like? Because from the age of sort of 16 to 20, you get an idea of what you think you might want to be doing or where you want to be going in your life, and then one day you maybe you start a new job, you've planned a move, you've made a connection somewhere, and then the following Monday, war's declared and everything stops.
The book starts on September 3rd, 1939, after the Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, announces that the country is at war with Germany. And people hear this on the radio because that's mostly how they heard about it. And that's the scene I have in my book, where the family's sitting around the radio and then they realize they're at war. So I've tried to reconstruct a believable situation. What would you do when this happens? What are you going to do? How you decide what to do next? And you have to learn what's going on, what's expected. But, right away they had blackouts and they had air raid shelters and rationing because the Germans wanted to cut off the food supplies. So right away, that was a problem. And then the government encouraged families to send small children away, children between the age of 5 and 16. They encouraged them to send them away to the country so they'd be safe from the bombing. And so many people, as unbelievable as it may sound, they did send their children away. So
Yeah,
that's the situation.
yeah, because it's a funny time, isn't it? Because it's how do you explain that to people? Is no, it was perfectly acceptable. Everyone agreed it was the best thing to do. We're going to send our children all across the country to people they don't know, and people they don't know were
And
told. Go on.
right, and overseas. Some of them went overseas, which
I
is
didn't
even
know.
more amazing.
Yeah, I didn't know
You
that.
know,
I didn't know. I remember
yes,
growing up. There used to be a lot about how people took in refugees not because they wanted to, but because they were told to. So children would turn up with these people that would just be horrible to them because they never wanted them there in the first place.
yes, that's definitely true. Yes.
And it's hard to imagine that people could be that heartless at the start of a war, but that was that was the reality. For they weren't refugees. What were they called? I've forgotten what they were called.
Well, you see, I think
Evacuees.
the one of the reasons,
They were called the
yeah, one of the
evacuees.
reasons was that, yes, one of the reasons was that, people were around during the First World War, and so it wasn't the first war for them, and so they did not want to lose another generation of young people. That's what they were afraid of.
Yeah,
So
definitely,
they were
definitely.
trying to save the young people.
How did you come to build Kate? Where does Kate come from?
I'm sorry, what? I
How did you
went.
come to build Kate? Where did Kate as a character come from?
Kate, where did she come from?
Yeah,
Um, Kate. Well, um, in a way, this isn't really how she came to be, but I used my best friend's name,
yeah.
Kathleen, and I used my best friend's house in the story because my friend, when we knew each other, we went to the same school, a convent school, actually. Um, her parents' house was right on the railway line, on the main line to London. So if you were in the house when a train went by, everything rattled. You couldn't hear anything. So I thought that was an interesting and realistic scene interesting scene. These are not wealthy people,
No.
the very much middle class people, ordinary people, really. And I tried to show in the story how even ordinary people could do amazing things and show amazing courage when push came to shove. And that's what Kate does. She starts out just being a young woman of 20 who's very annoyed that she can't pursue a singing career because she wants to be like Vera Lynn. She wants to sing, but she can't do that anymore because the mother wants her to stay at home, especially since they're probably going to send her younger brother away as an evacuee. So she has to adjust to all of that, and she starts out really rather selfish, but as time goes on, she actually becomes really quite amazing. She doesn't do anything really amazing, nothing that others hadn't done, but she's a far cry at the end of the book from the way she is at the beginning.
So
That's what
who?
they call a character arc.
Yeah,
Character arc.
but when I'm trying to when you're writing the book before you started writing the book. I know there was the memoir you discovered from your late father, but what was the sort of the seed or the genesis of who Kate? Where did Kate start from? That you then later I want to turn
Okay,
this
well,
idea into a story.
okay. That was the challenge. You've hit on the challenge because with this story, I knew the ending, but I didn't know how I was going to get the book make a story that would actually lead to the ending. So I had to come up with a story that would actually bring Kate, this young woman, into the ending of the story, and it just kind of evolved. I followed the course of history, what was happening in the country at the time, and then the family went along with all those things, and then Kate uh, she had to keep adjusting and adjusting. And then there was I can tell you this, there's a young Jewish girl that arrived needing help. And then she decided that she would help her to escape because her parents had been deported. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in the country at the time, even though not everyone knew that. And so that's part of the story as well.
Yeah, it's always been an interesting time. Um, so just tell people a little bit about your father without revealing the ending.
About the ending.
No, just tell
Uh,
people a little bit about your father without
oh, my
revealing the
father.
ending. Yeah.
Okay. Well, he was in medical school when the war started, and he took a year out to uh, I can't, how do I say this? He took a year out to
No,
help
no, but
with
I
the
mean,
war
just
effort.
who was he as a person?
I'm sorry, what?
Who was he as a person?
Oh, well, he was um a very dedicated doctor, and he liked he shared the characteristic that I think all good doctors have, which is that they really try to help people who are suffering.
Yeah.
And so he did actually, when after he finished medical school, he joined the Navy, and he actually was on a destroyer, and he was on a ship, the HMS, no, the SS, I think it was, HMS Wild Goose. And the ship went from Scapa Flow to Murmansk in Russia. So that was the North Atlantic, and very dangerous, and patrolled by the wolf packs, the German U-boats. And that's what he did. He was the ship surgeon on that ship. That's what he did in the war.
So, yeah, that's crazy. What happened after the war? What did he start doing then? That because you
Well,
guys as a family moved around. So
yes, well, he started working. I don't know all the jobs he had actually, because I was a baby.
mm.
I don't know, but he had various jobs and training that he completed, and in London, including in Liverpool, which is where I was born. There's a school of hygiene and tropical medicine there, and that's where he was when I was born. And he actually became very interested in epidemiology and tropical diseases and things. So that's kind of his field. That's what he did later on.
So how did you end up moving as a family to America?
Well, that was again my father. Um, he he was wanting to do research, and at the time in England, there there weren't many opportunities. There wasn't the funding, and they didn't really expect doctors to do research so much. I think that's true. So he was given an offer by the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill to go for a year, and they said they would support his research. He could bring his own lab assistant with him. They'd give him a lab, they'd give him supplies, and he could just spend a year and do research. And so that was too good an opportunity for him to pass up. So he just moved the entire family to North Carolina for a year. That's how I came to this
What was that
country.
like for you? Like going from Surrey to North Carolina?
It was a complete cultural shock. There was there was nothing to prepare me, moving from a Catholic school where it was all girls school with nuns, and I moved to a public American high school which was co-ed, and it had a lot of social life and dances and football games and all the rest of it. And the educational system was completely different. So it was a very big adjustment for me, but I did like it. I enjoyed it.
I'm trying to what year was this?
1964, the year
So
of the Beatles came
so
to America.
so the year of the Beatles, you left Surrey.
Yeah, it was my 15 minutes of fame, the only fame I've ever had, really, because I was born in Liverpool, and I told everybody.
But that must have been absolutely crazy in 1964 to leave England, like and Surrey and end up in North Carolina.
How was it? I'm sorry.
No, I said that
What?
must have been
I'm
crazy in
sorry.
1964 bec-
Oh
bec-
yeah.
because
Well,
sorry, I was just going to say they're worlds apart, and you've got the swinging '60s. You've got Elvis, you've got Cadillacs, you've got Corvettes, everything that England didn't have.
yes, we everybody was very envious of me, all my friends, because they thought America was really, they didn't use the word cool in those days, but I
Yeah.
mean, it's kind of how it was. Everyone was enjoying the movies and Elvis and all the, and yes, all the things you described. So there was a lot, people were materially in general better off in America than in England at the time. So that was something that I enjoyed really at the time.
And there must have been a huge culture difference as well, like you were saying, going from a convent school. Because I'd know this because I've been to Catholic schools, being the fact that my mum is Irish and I was raised as an Irish Catholic, so I've had my fair share of Catholic schools. And yeah, and then going to, I guess, a free thinking, rather laid back American school.
Yes, well, actually, you would understand if you. I think you really do need to read Kate's now because because the school is a Catholic school, and Kate is from an Irish family. She is an Irish Kate Murphy, and her mother's very strong Catholic, goes to mass every day, and all that sort of thing. So and I wanted to use that because my friend whose house I mentioned I used for the setting, she was a Catholic. She was raised that way, and I wasn't Catholic. I never was, but I don't know why my parents sent me there. But in any case, coming to American high school, there was nothing religious about it. I mean, I can't even. I mean, you can just imagine that it wasn't. It was just it was a school with, of course, classes, but people enjoyed their social lives as much. I mean, that was equally important, was how you managed to arrange friends and your circle of friends and activities outside of school. So, and actually, interesting little factoid here. Uh, my classmate was James Taylor.
Oh wow, wow! That
Yes, James Taylor was a junior that year in 1964 at Chapel Hill High School, and he and I had French class together.
See, you've got the Beatles and James Taylor. So,
Well, again, just claim to fame with nothing more than that. Just had just a small connection, really.
so after these, you say they're small connections, but they're quite pivotal people and a band. So, um, what made you stay in America?
Well, we stayed and ended up staying for 4 years as a family. My father had a different job. He went down to New Orleans, became a chair of the department in a medical school there. And I went to college there. I went to Tulane University. And I graduated from Tulane. And when I graduated, my family unfortunately split up. Parents split up, and everybody went back to England. But I was having too much fun, and I'd graduated from college, and I didn't want to go back to England, so I stayed. And then I got married, and so I've been
Took
there
care
ever
of itself.
since.
So,
Yes.
when your dad was alive, did you ever get the opportunity to talk to him then?
About the book, about this,
Well, about the war
about,
and his experiences.
yes. Well, you see, I didn't much. I mean, partly because you probably know this. So people of that generation didn't really talk much about it. They just didn't. And the other was that there was the Official Secrets Act, by which people couldn't talk about things that they knew about, and they could be prosecuted if they were caught talking about things.
Yeah.
So there were several reasons why he didn't talk about it. And I suppose I wasn't that curious. I should have been. Now I would have been. But when I
Yeah.
was growing up, I was just too concerned with what young people do when they're trying to grow up, you know.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? It's hard because you don't. I mean, I remember my own grandfather, and sadly, he died when I was about 7 or 8 years old. But he had the Burma Star, and but when I ask anyone about, well, what did he do? He exactly the same. He wouldn't talk about it, and he just said no good comes
Yes,
from talking about the past, and that was
that's
his
right.
answer to everything. He just no, we don't do it, you know. And
Well,
yet, and
well, it's one reason I wrote the book, actually, is because I thought that the event that happens at the end, which I know I'm going to drive you crazy not telling what
no,
it
no,
is,
no,
but
not at all. I like
I
this.
thought it was a story worth telling. And, you know, it's one story that isn't well known, hasn't been written about very much. And you know, those kinds of stories get lost to history. And there are probably so many of those stories that no one's written about, and so no one knows about. And I thought this one's worth talking about.
Yeah.
It's worth keeping alive.
Well, I mean, obviously, I don't know the actual story, but it reminded me of the Nicholas Winton story. And he was a chap that saved refugees just as the war was
Yes.
starting. And then when the war started, I don't know if you know the history. There was four of them, and he did a lot of the campaigning and money raising back in the UK. And he saved something like 600 odd children. Um, as sort of a direct result of his efforts and the efforts of his friends. And none of it came to light until the 80s. And then,
Yes, I know about that. Yes. There are a lot of those unsung heroes
mm,
just now we're learning about, really.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, he came about in the 80s, I think, because of the Esther Ranson. They've just done a film with him, and it was played by Anthony Hopkins, and it talks about the story. Well, it's about who he is and what happened, and how it haunted him that he didn't save more children. And it was, Esther Ranson did a piece on it back in the 80s, and he got to actually meet. It's when they came to England, he then lost track of where they all were. And Esther Ranson did this piece where he got to meet them all, and he then realised just
Yes.
the impact he'd had, and it thankfully it gave him some peace. Um, it One of the things when I was reading the press release that was sent through to me is we have a perception. Like I said, I have a perception or a memory of my grandfather, and it's not of somebody that would have served in the war. And now, as I'm an adult and I've looked back at his medals over the years, and I see the medals he had, and so I know the places he must have been, and I can't put two and two together because it's not the man I know. And it's, and I was a very small child, so I only ever got to see the best bits of granddads like little kids do. And when I saw him, he was an old man in his 60s. My memory of him, not a man in his 30s who in a uniform and doing his bit. Um, and you discovered something incredible about your father after he'd passed away. Did it? Did you at any point sort of ponder about the man you knew, and then like, oh my God, this happened, because you must have looked at him differently.
Yes. But you know, I always admired him because he had a very distinguished career in his work. Did research and had went all over the world really to help people with epidemics, and especially in Africa, he would go there and work in clinics where they didn't have the medication, they didn't have things they could do to help children not have horrible diseases and things. So, I was used to him. And he was quite well known for a while. He used to be on television quite a bit. So
Oh wow.
even, so yeah, he did. He was, he was known as a kind of a public health figure. And and he was very articulate. He was very good at talking off the top of his head. So, for example, they had a horrible garbage strike. And I think it was in Liverpool actually one year. And so he went down to see it, and then they interviewed him. They said, well, Dr. Stewart, what do you think about this? Is this a public health hazard? Well, of course it's a public health hazard. We have rats coming in, you know. He would talk about things like that, and you'd put the television on, and there he'd be on the television. So even though he had a different kind of career in the Navy and things he did in the war, he really, you really couldn't say he wasn't doing amazing things during his life when I knew him.
True. And does that leading towards back to you, does that explain how many of you, because you have quite a few compliments yourself?
Well, I never really felt very smart around my father, and I didn't like math and science, and he was a scientist, and he thought that if you can't do math, you couldn't do anything. So I spent most of my life feeling kind of stupid, actually. So I'm very pleased that I've been able to write this book. And he never knew, of course, that I wrote it. He didn't know I published books because he died before I published the first one. So I'm sorry he didn't know that, but he did think I could write well. So he did tell me that once. So um, I don't know why I'm saying so much. You're bringing all this out of me. I didn't plan to say things like this, but
No, no.
it's when you're the sibling, when you're the child of a big personality, it can be difficult.
It,
I'll just say that much.
oh, I can imagine. I can imagine. I certainly don't want to press any buttons that I wasn't invited to press. To be fair, but what happens is I get sent the publicist's information, and that's where my curiosity goes because I then want to know about the person as much as I want to know about the book. And of course, you know, you've done a lot of things yourself, and so where does the art come from?
Where does it come from?
Yeah, how did you get
What
into
I
art?
do?
Yeah, the
Well,
painting.
I think
You're
okay.
very modest,
You
aren't you?
know, I, well, I don't. I know there are so many people that do so many better things than I do. I just know all
That's
that,
very, very, very British of you to say so.
Uh, okay, that part of me is still there, I guess. Yeah. Um, well, I think one thing is that I really have a kind of a drive to do things creative, and it's always been there. I've always had that feeling. And because I worked in administrative jobs, management really, all my career, I couldn't express that side of myself very well, very much. I tried, but I couldn't really do much with it. So when I had an opportunity after I stopped working to paint and write and do things like that, I wanted to make up for lost time. And so I had a real drive to do that, really. And it's been very satisfying that I've had the opportunity to be able to do that.
So, 'cause, yeah, it says here that um, you you've got you enjoy native wildflowers and landscapes in watercolors, and some are held in private collections around America and Edinburgh and UK. And there's been a few exhibitions at various galleries, wineries, etc., um, including in London. Um, so it's more than just a dabble with a brush.
That's true. Yeah, I have a certain a certain ability to paint flowers. Yes, I will say that.
And yeah, and so what is it you see?
I'm sorry, what
What is it you see? So
I still can't hear.
sorry, what I said is because you just said something quite important. Is you said you have a good ability to paint flowers, native wildlife, native flowers. So what is it you see that makes you want to put it on, through the brush?
Well, Okay. See, I'm not a big picture person. I like small things. I like putting a magnifying glass on something small and making it bigger. So that's what wildflowers are. That they're things that many people don't even notice. They step on them. They don't see. They don't take the trouble to look and see how amazingly intricate they are, and so varied, so very different, so diverse. You could even say. So if I paint something like a wildflower that most people wouldn't notice, it makes people pay attention. They see something that they hadn't seen before, and that's what I'm interested in. Even my stories are really about ordinary people, and you start writing about them, it makes them bigger.
Yeah,
That's what interests me.
it is. I like that because I, I've always had this thing, not especially about wildflowers or anything. It's just something I noticed many years ago that you can see a really well tended rose. Like you know, people that get passionate about roses and certain flowers in their gardens, and they're catered for like they like they're royalty. And then you could be hiking somewhere, and in the middle of nowhere, in some craggy rock with a stream in the middle, wind blowing and everything, there'll be this tiny little beautiful flower that nothing tends to it except the roughness of nature. And yet it can, if you just pause for a second, it's just as beautiful, if not more beautiful than the rose. But every single element is against it. And as delicate as it looks, it's the only plant strong enough to survive there. And nature has always fascinated me like that.
Well, I couldn't have said it better. You just said it for me. Thank you.
Oh, well, I'll take that compliment. Thank you very much. There is something, isn't there? There is, if you bother to look, and
Yes.
and it's a credit and that's why I asked you what do you see, because
Yes. Well, it was a good question. I agree that that's part of what interests me too. Is I feel that I actually like all flowers. I
yeah,
enjoy the cultivated varieties as well, but they are just in your face compared to wildflowers. They're red exactly because they have bright colors or strong perfume or something. And like something like a violet, you can hardly see it under the leaves. But if you
yeah,
pick it up and look at it, it's really amazing, so intricate.
it is,
And
it
then you
is,
have all the yeah, and
it,
you have all these insects that come, and they just come to one particular kind of flower. And that particular flower has just grown itself so that it can welcome that one insect that will pollinate it or something. It's just amazing.
no, I completely agree. I completely agree, and I'm always fascinated by how delicate they look. And it's just what you just can't be that delicate. Because some of these things, survive in elements that I can't survive in unless I've got £1,000 worth of camping gear and a survival expert
Right.
with me to help me get through the night. And then there's this little
Yeah.
flower that's just like, yeah, no, we're good, we're fine. This is where I thrive. you know. And I just want to bring it back quickly, because I'm conscious I don't want to take up much more of your time. Is you mentioned about it's things that often not seen and bringing them to life, bringing them under the microscope, I think is what you said, and how that reflects in people. And is that kind of the foundation of the characters that you're trying to bring down on paper when you're writing?
Um, Let me think about that. Well, mostly in that my heroes are people that are underappreciated or doubting themselves. Um, they're not strong people. They're not heroes. They're not
Mm,
traditional heroes. They're ordinary people who may, in the end, do heroic things. But even I'm just going to, for a second, if I can, change to Estelle, my first novel.
yeah,
That was about the painter Degas, you know. And I wrote the story during the time of his life when he wasn't yet famous, and he was doubting himself enormously. So there you have someone not sure, had
Yeah,
to wait a while before. Yeah,
it's,
that's what's interesting.
it
Yeah.
is interesting. It is interesting because one of the things that fascinates me about just about people in general is sometimes when you come across successful people, and if you're ever able to have a conversation with them, you discover just how they're the opposite of what you thought. You imagine them to be these big, courageous people who had this grand plan and knew exactly how things were working out. And often they're just like, no, I've literally had nothing figured out, and it just kind of fell into place via mistakes or goodwill. It just happened.
Yes.
So
People are endlessly fascinating.
they are,
I
they
mean,
are.
it's cliche to say that, but I mean, that's the truth of it. That's why you write novels, really. You don't write novels, you write about other kinds of things. But, if you write about novels, you write about people. You have to.
Yeah. Did you find that when you're writing those novels that you, like you said, you've written 3 books now? Do you find you're just exploring people?
Yes, I think what you can do with novel writing is you can have a character. You have a character, you put that character in a setting, and then you say what would happen to that character in that setting. And if something happened, like to jar their world, their private comfortable world, which is what you have to do actually in a novel, you have to have what's called an inciting incident, like a war or something.
Yeah,
Okay, so what are they going to do? How are they going to react? And that's interesting.
it is. It is. It's. I don't know why I keep having this book pop into my head, which was a Roald Dahl book called Danny the Champion of the World, and it's kind of like that. I think just because to me that represents just because I don't know if you've ever read the book. It's really about two people that don't do anything special, a boy and his father, and yeah, and Danny becomes a little hero at the end. But it's that exploration of who people are and what they can become when circumstances, like in Kate's war, who Kate could have been and who Kate became because of the circumstances put upon her by, you know, politics, world governance, whatever you want to call it, but by the outbreak of war. And like I said, it's only through reflection in this conversation that I'm having with you that you forget that it's something that actually happened and was a huge impact across the whole of Europe and later the whole world, really, where people got one day and the next day war was declared and any plan you had stopped there and then.
Exactly. That's right.
And just lastly, and this is really random, it's just a question I like to ask and I generally like to finish on, and just completely to engage in your imagination. If you could go back to any place in time, anywhere, anywhen in time, where would you go? What car would you drive? And what music would you be listening to?
Oh dear, put me on the spot here. Well, I like simpler times.
Yeah.
I like when times well, it's again, it's sort of cliche, but gentler times. I don't think we need all this technology. I mean, I know you and I are talking, we couldn't do that without this, but
Mm.
I really don't think our lives have improved, and I think actually technology is complicating things a lot. So I like the fact that when I was younger, we didn't have, well, we had a telephone. Not everyone had a telephone, but it wasn't a mobile phone. It was
Mm.
just, if you were around when it rang, you picked it up. If you weren't, you didn't. And somehow we managed to get by. We managed to communicate, keep in touch with each other, send letters, that kind of thing. So it would be that kind of time. So probably I'm talking about the 50s or 60s, maybe that. I don't want to be, well, maybe even the 30s, maybe,
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's wherever you'd like to go, wherever you think you'd actually, I'd like to revisit that or visit it for the first time.
Yeah, well, I just read a book about Jacqueline Kennedy when she was in Paris, spending her junior year abroad. It's fiction, called Jacqueline in Paris by Anne Marr, I think is the name. And I was just astonished by how not primitive, I can't really say primitive things were, but by our standards today, they were primitive.
It
You
was a
didn't have
simpler
a
time.
lot of
It was
running.
much simpler.
Yeah. And yet, she had a wonderful time. I mean, in the book, it sounded as though she did, but I think that we don't need all these trappings we have right now to be happy. I don't mean to lecture, and I don't want to
No,
get
no,
too
I don't
philosophical.
disagree with you. I wish the world stopped around the 80s and we could just reset and go back a bit further again. Because I'm with you that I'm not saying that it was easier. I'm just saying that life was simpler. And for
Yes,
me, there's a
I agree
difference.
with that.
And
Yes.
I think it went in a direction that I didn't like once we hit the 90s, really. Maybe, but definitely I loved the 80s. But I was an 80s child. So, I was born in the 70s and
Mhm.
kind of had my teenage years in the 80s. So it was, maybe it's just that. But so what car would you be driving and what music would you listen to?
Well, I'd have to change the era for that because I still love the Beatles more than anyone. I like classical music actually as well, but
You can
the
take the
Beatles,
Beatles back
they
to
really have
1930s
endured.
Paris. It's
Yeah.
it's it's
And
it's
then
just
a
imagination
car,
and magic. So
yeah, a car. I don't really care about a car as long as it runs.
that'll do. That'll do. So we've got the Beatles and 1930s Paris by whoever picks you up or whatever car just happened to be in the driveway. That's
Well, my father had a Rover when we were growing up, and I
of
liked
course
that
he
one.
did.
It was a smooth car. Yeah.
Of course he did. Yeah, no, Rover was a massive, massive manufacturer of luxury cars in the UK, along with Jaguar and Triumph and a few others. But Rover was, you had the P6, the P1s, the P4s, P5s, to name but a few. So that's been brilliant. Thank you very much for your time. And also thank you very much for your patience. There was a few technical issues and it was very kind of you to hang around, hold on and help me sort them out. I do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you.
And there it is, another episode of the David Watson podcast with Linda, who has written what just sounds like a magnificent book in a topic with so much depth and so many things we don't think about today. And on top of that, if you get a chance, check out her artwork. And as always, the links to the book will be in the description. And wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever you believe, be blessed and take care.